Hi folks, 2020 is still happening, and yes, I've been stuck inside watching films, as pretty much most of us have been. So it's time for me to talk about the films that I watched in June. And hopefully there's going to be some things in here that you like, hopefully some things in here that you might want to avoid. So let's just jump right into it, shall we? And not waste any more of the time that we all have so much of. And the first film I saw in June was an 80s classic, apparently. And that was a film called The Wraith, and it's a Charlie Sheen movie all about a small desert town where a gang of car-thieving bikers are thieving cars. No, really, I mean they run this town. And then they start getting killed off in races with a mysterious black car called The Wraith. And then there's a B-plot about the lead biker's girlfriend kind of fancying Charlie Sheen and him being a little bit cross about this. And I've got to be honest, this was a very average 3 out of 5 horror film. But what's really interesting about it is about 20 minutes in, I realised that the film was almost a complete template for a much better film that came out about 7 or 8 years later, and that was The Crow. The one about Brandon Lee being a dead musician who returns from the dead to kill off all the people who murdered him and his missus. And, I mean, I could say in a way that The Crow was based on this, only that obviously The Crow was based on a comic book that came out around the same time as this film. So, yeah, but still, I mean, The Wraith is kind of a fun film, it's kind of goofy, a load of nonsense in equal measure, but it's nothing you'd really want to write home about. You'd be better off watching The Crow. Continuing with some comic book nonsense, another film I saw that was an awful lot like last month's Bocas, remember that? Yeah, sadly I do too. Well, this is another film that was written and directed by the same guy that played the lead who also wanted to make a superhero movie, and that was A Mosquito Man. And unlike Bocas, which was some guy trying to shoot a film of his own wee comic and not having much money, this is actually a film with a modest budget, but it's from the people who made the Trauma movies, which are kind of, if you don't know what Trauma is, it's basically they make really, really bad, horrible films that are deliberately over the top, gory and stupid and done in a kind of cliched way. And this film is very much like that because it's a pastiche of cheesy old superhero films. I mean, most specifically, this is basically the film Darkman, which, if you've not seen it, it's actually a very early film from Sam Raimi, the guy who made the Evil Dead and Spider-Man movies, and had Liam Neeson in it, when he was just like a jobbing actor who'd scored a role in a big movie. And Mosquito Man is all about this guy who gets a chemical agent tested on him, one to try and save you from poisonous killer mosquitoes which are plaguing the city, and it ends up making him really ugly and a little bit psycho, and the whole thing's shot on the super cheap with cheesy effects, although it's all being done to be deliberately over the top, and it has moments of being occasionally amusing. But really, this is a 2 out of 5, so I would skip it unless you're really obsessed with seeing comic book stuff or really bad films. And next up was another low budget entry, which is definitely a pattern this month, a movie called The Borderlands. But this was a found footage film, you know, like in the style of the Blair Witch films or Paranormal Activity, where it's all shot from the point of view of cameras, and the idea being someone down the line has found this footage and is now cut it together to make like an understandable story. And this is all about a priest and a techie guy sent by the Vatican to investigate rumours of demonic activity in a wee English church. And all the usual things pop up. Is this actually just a priest trying to get PR? Is it local kids just mucking about? And, you know, everyone's going to end up falling out with each other, and what's it all going to be really about? I mean, the found footage thing has been kind of done to death in the years since the Paranormal Activity movies, even to the point when there's things like the Bad Ben movies, which is a series of haunted house movies, just like this, but all shot by the same guy in his own house. I mean, a couple of them are actually quite funny, but the rest not so much. If you're really into that, maybe check them out. But Borderlands actually manages to do a few interesting things with the premise. And if nothing else, like the last 15 minutes of it is genuinely different and very clever, at least for a film like this. Also, total kudos for getting, like, well-known Scottish theatre actor Gordon Kennedy in the main role. So, I mean, I'll give this a happy wee 3 out of 5, and yeah, it's good for a few scares and a little bit of demonic daftness. You shouldn't confuse Borderlands with the next entry, which is Savageland, which is another film I saw, and yes, it's also another horror film, because I watched quite a few of them this month, but this one is kind of novel, in the way that it's actually shot in the style of like one of those unsolved crime mystery documentaries that you get all over Netflix, where it's all about a small town in America where an undocumented handyman with a penchant for photography gets blamed with the murders of 15 different people at various places all across this town throughout one night. And what makes it really interesting is that the horror of the situation's played out not through cheap video and things, but through a roll of film that the guy apparently took on his camera during that fateful night, which is actually full of some really creepy imagery that's really brilliantly photographed. And it's a really clever and unsettling wee story that feels so believable that it's kind of scary. I mean, genuinely, I can imagine some people probably watched this and for at least part of it probably thought it was a true story. And it winds this whole tale of a possible crime with interviews with locals who believe the guy is innocent and then other people that think he killed everyone. And it's definitely a 4 out of 5 recommendation for me. It's an absolute cracker. The only problem with it is there are some moments of slightly bad pacing and there's a few cheesy bits where some of the acting maybe isn't necessarily as good as it could have been. But no, absolutely, Savageland is well worth checking out, especially if you like unsolved crime documentaries on Netflix. You'll absolutely get a hoot out of this one. But I managed to end June on an absolute classic, because I saw the old Buster Keaton movie, The Cameraman, which is actually an old silent film about a cheap photographer guy who meets a lady and falls in love and tries to become a newsreel shooter to impress her. And in true Buster Keaton style, he goes around all over the place and gets into lots of silly physical comedy japes and fun. And there's not a huge amount to say about it. I mean, other than that, I was genuinely surprised by how funny it was. I laughed out loud a bunch of times in the film and really got invested in the characters. And I suppose that's probably why it's a classic. And yeah, I'll give this 4 out of 5 straight off the bat. It's a great movie. Only let down by maybe a couple of bits where I felt it was moving a bit slow, but that might just be me being a Philistine, and I still really enjoyed it overall. And those are the films that I saw in June. But one of the reasons I didn't see quite so many films during June was because I've actually been watching an awful lot of TV, and not just the stuff that I've been reviewing, although that has taken up quite a bit of my time. But I thought I'd recommend you something else that I watched, and that was the first season of the show Dark. And Dark is actually a German TV show on Netflix, although it does have dubbing if you hate reading like subtitles, although sometimes it's a bit strange sounding. But it's all about a small town where some people are having affairs and kids are acting up and there are other secrets and lies all over the place. But then kids start to disappear around the town and bodies turn up, but sometimes they're the bodies of other kids in strange out-of-date clothes. And the police start talking amongst themselves about how all this happened 33 years ago in a very similar way. And it kind of plays out in a weird mix of the show The Stranger, which was a really good show with a load of well-known British actors in it, and also Stranger Things, which you've probably seen. And it ends up being a bit more interesting and more odd and unusual than either of them. But I won't spoil the mystery because it's not that hard to work out what's going on, but it's really fun watching it all being told and watching it all spill out with all these interesting characters. But yeah, check out Dark. That's my recommendation for this month. So until my Movies by Month comes out for July, which should only be in a week or two, please come back and visit me here in September, because I'm taking August off. So until then, I've been Ian, and these have been my grumpy opinions. And a special thanks to everybody listening, and especially my patrons, and most especially to Michelle Forbes and Judith Coloma, my top tier patrons. Thank you everybody. Everybody stay safe. Cheerio.